It's a freezing night, the streets are empty, and a young boy sits on a lonely corner, his small hand strumming a broken, old guitar. He plays not for fun, but for survival. Every note he plucks carries a silent plea, one for warmth, for kindness, for just a little bit of hope. His little sister sleeps beside him on a flattened cardboard box, wrapped in a sweater far too big for her tiny frame. She's only 6, too young to understand the weight of the world pressing down on her brother's shoulders, but old enough to feel the hunger gnawing at her belly. Most people pass by without a glance. Some drop a few coins into his cracked cup, never meeting his eyes. Others don't even notice him, as if he's just another shadow lost in the city's cold indifference. But Marcus keeps playing. He has to. Then, footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Calculated. Marcus freezes as a figure steps into the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. A police officer. But something about him feels off. The way he walks, the way he stares, there's no kindness in his gaze. No sympathy. Just something cold and unsettling. The man stops, looking down at Marcus with a sneer. "What do you think you're doing out here, boy?" His voice is low, rough, laced with something that makes Marcus's stomach twist. I'm just playing," Marcus stammers, his fingers tightening around the neck of his guitar. "Just trying to make some money for food." The officer scoffs, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "Playing?" He eyes the battered guitar with disgust. "Nobody wants to hear you scrape those busted strings. You're nothing but a nuisance. A stain on this street." Marcus's face burns with shame, but he doesn't argue. He just grips his guitar tighter, his heart pounding as the officer takes a step closer. Then, without warning, the crack. The man snatches the guitar from Marcus's hands and smashes it against the pavement. Splinters fly. The last thing Marcus hears is the faint, dying echo of the strings snapping under the officer's boot. The boy's breath catches in his throat as he stares at the shattered pieces of the only thing that had ever given him a voice. The officer laughs. Cold. Cruel. Merciless. And just when it seems like all hope is lost, a shadow moves. A presence steps forward. Snoop Dogg. What happens next will leave you speechless. Watch until the end to see how this story unfolds. And don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment on where you're watching from, and show some love, because your support helps bring more stories like this to life. The cold night air carried the sound of Marcus's trembling breath, his fingers still hovering over the shattered remains of his guitar. The laughter of the officer echoed off the surrounding buildings, each cruel chuckle slicing deeper into the boy's chest. "Your sister?" The officer scoffed, his voice dripping with mockery. "And where's mommy and daddy, huh? Let me guess, they ran off, didn't they? Left you two to fend for yourselves. Typical." Marcus swallowed hard, the knot in his throat tightening. The words cut deep, deeper than he wanted to admit. He shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "My mom's sick, she can't work. I'm just trying to help." The officer's smirk twisted into something even uglier. "Oh, you're a little hero now, huh?" He took another slow step forward, his shadow stretching over Marcus like something out of a nightmare. "Well, let me tell you something, hero, you're not saving anyone sitting out here like some street rat. You're a nuisance. You're trash. You don't belong here." Marcus gripped his guitar tighter, his knuckles white. He wanted to say something, to push back, to prove that he did matter. But fear held his voice captive. The officer's gaze darkened. His twisted smile grew. "Go home," he ordered, his voice thick with disdain. "And take that piece of junk with you. Or better yet." Before Marcus could react, the officer snatched the guitar from his hands. "No, please," Marcus choked out, reaching for it. The officer turned the instrument over in his hands, inspecting it with feigned interest. "This thing is worthless," he muttered, fingers tracing the worn wood. Then, his smirk returned. "You think this is gonna save you?" You think music is gonna fix your pathetic little life? Marcus's heart slammed against his ribs. Then, crack. The guitar shattered against the pavement. Jagged pieces flew in all directions. The strings snapped, their final, broken notes lost to the cold night air. Marcus fell to his knees, hands trembling as he reached for the remains, his tears blurring his vision. The officer stepped back, shaking his head with a laugh. Pathetic, he muttered. Absolutely pathetic. And then, another sound. Footsteps. Steady. Slow. Confident. This time, they were accompanied by a voice, low, smooth, unmistakable. Snoop Dogg. Draped in a long coat, flanked by his security team, he emerged from the shadows, his gaze locking onto the scene before him. His expression hardened. He didn't hesitate. Hey. His voice cut through the night like a blade. What the hell do you think you're doing? The officer froze, his smug grin faltering. His eyes flickered to Snoop and the two men standing beside him, tall, built, serious. For the first time that night, the street wasn't empty. It was charged. Marcus looked up, his tear-streaked face a mix of fear and disbelief. He knew who Snoop Dogg was. Everyone did. But seeing him here, now, standing up for him, it felt unreal. Emma stirred, rubbing her sleepy eyes as she clung to the oversized sweater. The officer straightened his shoulders, puffing out his chest. This doesn't concern you, he barked. Move along. Snoop didn't flinch. He took a step forward, then knelt to Marcus's level. His voice softened. You okay, kid? Marcus tried to answer, but his voice wouldn't come. He just shook his head, gripping the broken guitar pieces like they were the only thing keeping him together. Snoop exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Then he stood, his gaze locking onto the officer with an intensity that sent a ripple of tension through the air. Seems to me you got no business treating kids like that. The officer sneered. And who the hell are you supposed to be? One of Snoop's security guards shifted, ready to move, but Snoop held up a hand. He didn't need backup. His voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it, one that couldn't be ignored. Name's Snoop Dogg, he said simply. Maybe you heard of me. The officer's sneer deepened. Don't care who you are. You're interfering with police business. Snoop's eyes narrowed. Nah, he said, shaking his head. What you're doing? That ain't business. That's just straight up wrong. What happens next? You won't believe it. Watch till the end to see how this story unfolds. And don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment on where you're watching from, and show some love, because your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Snoop glanced at Marcus, then back at the officer, his expression unreadable. Business, he repeated, his voice calm but edged with something sharp. Looks to me like you're just out here breaking a kid's guitar and messing with people who can't fight back. The officer stiffened, his hand twitching toward his belt. But Snoop didn't back down. You're real tough, huh? He continued, his words dripping with sarcasm. Picking on a 12-year-old. That make you feel like a big man? The officer's face turned red with anger. I said this doesn't concern you. Get out of here before I have you arrested for obstruction. At that, Snoop let out a low, humorless chuckle. Arrest me? For what would be indecent? He took a slow step forward, closing the space between them. Nah, man. You're not gonna intimidate me. His voice dropped lower, steadier. And you sure as hell ain't gonna lay a hand on that kid again. The officer's jaw clenched, his body tensing. Then, as if on instinct, his hand moved toward Marcus, as if to shove him aside. But Snoop was faster. His hand shot out, catching the officer's wrist in a firm grip before he could make contact. For a moment, the street fell silent. The tension in the air was thick, electric. The officer's eyes widened, his breath hitching as he looked down at Snoop's grip on his wrist. He tried to yank his hand back, but Snoop held firm, just enough to make a point. "You don't touch him," Snoop said, his voice deadly calm. "Not now. Not ever." The officer ripped his hand away, his face twisting with fury and disbelief. "You think you can talk to me like that? You think you're better than me?" His voice rose with each word, his humiliation turning into something uglier. Snoop's gaze didn't waver. "I think," he said, voice even, "that someone needs to put you in your place." The officer snapped. With a sudden burst of rage, he lunged at Snoop, fist clenched, his face a mask of fury. But he barely got 2 steps before Snoop's security team moved. One guard intercepted the officer mid-lunge, grabbing him by the arms and locking them behind his back with effortless control. The other stepped between Snoop and the struggling man, creating a wall. "Get your hands off me," the officer shouted, twisting in their grip. His face was flushed, sweat beading at his temple. "I'm a cop. You can't do this." Snoop crossed his arms, watching with cool indifference. "You sure about that?" he asked. The officer's struggle slowed, confusion flickering across his face. "What are you talking about?" Snoop nodded toward one of his security guards, who was already dialing a number. "We're gonna find out real quick who you really are." The officer's eyes darted around the street, searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to go. The street was empty, except for Marcus, Emma, and the men now surrounding him. Minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up, their flashing red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. Real cops stepped out, their expressions unreadable as they took in the scene. One of them, a middle-aged officer with a sharp, no-nonsense look, stepped forward. His eyes flicked between Snoop, the restrained officer, and Marcus, who was still clutching the broken guitar. "What's going on here?" Snoop jerked his chin toward the man in uniform. "This dude's been out here pretending to be one of you. Harassing kids. Breaking their stuff. Figured you'd want to handle it." The real officers exchanged glances. "Let's see some ID," one of them said. The fake cop stiffened. I don't need to show you anything," he blurted out, but his voice cracked with desperation. The officer in charge raised an eyebrow. "No badge, no ID?" "Yeah. I don't think so." He grabbed the man's arm, pulling him from Snoop's security team's hold. "We're taking you in." The fake officer thrashed, his face twisting in rage. "You think you've won?" he yelled as they dragged him toward the patrol car. "This isn't over." Snoop didn't flinch. He just watched as the car door slammed shut, silencing the man's muffled shouts behind the glass. And just like that, the street was quiet again. Snoop turned back to Marcus. The boy was still sitting on the cold pavement, the shattered remains of his guitar resting in his lap. Emma stood beside him, her tiny hand clutching his shoulder, her wide eyes filled with fear and something else, something like awe. "You okay?" Snoop asked, kneeling in front of Marcus again. The boy nodded slowly, though his hand still trembled. "Thank you," he whispered. I didn't know what to do." Snoop smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me, kid," he said. "What that dude did, that wasn't right. No one should ever treat you like that." Marcus blinked hard, fighting back tears. His gaze dropped to his guitar, split down the middle, its strings snapped and useless. "He broke it," he murmured. "It was all I had." Snoop's smile softened. "Don't worry about that," he said, standing up. "We'll get you a new one. A better one." Marcus's head shot up, his eyes wide. "Really?" "Really," Snoop nodded. "But you gotta promise me one thing." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Anything." Snoop looked him straight in the eye. "Don't stop playing," he said. "No matter what. You got something special, kid. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Marcus swallowed hard, his chest swelling with something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. "I won't," he promised. Snoop grinned. "Good." He reached down, ruffling the boy's hair before glancing toward Emma. Now let's get y'all home. It's too damn cold out here." As they walked toward Snoop's waiting car, Marcus glanced back one last time. The broken guitar still lay in the street. But for the first time, he didn't feel broken with it. Because tonight, something had changed. And for the first time in a long time, he believed things might just get better. At the empty street corner where Marcus had spent so many nights playing his music, the silence felt different now. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the closing of a chapter. One he hadn't expected to end so suddenly. But as he stood there, looking out at the quiet streets, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't facing the future alone. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of their small apartment, casting soft shadows on the worn-out carpet. Marcus sat on the floor, his eyes locked on the broken guitar pieces scattered before him. His fingers traced the splintered wood, his mind replaying the events of the night before like a song stuck on repeat. Across the room, Emma was curled up on the couch, quietly coloring in a torn notebook. The oversized sweater that had shielded her from the cold still hung loosely around her small frame. Their mother lay just a few feet away, frail and pale, her soft, uneven coughs breaking the heavy stillness that filled the apartment. Then, a knock at the door. The sound jolted Marcus from his thoughts. His heart raced. Visitors were rare. And unexpected knocks? They usually meant bad news. He exchanged a glance with Emma before slowly rising to his feet, his bare toes sinking into the thin carpet as he approached the door. Peeking through the peephole, his breath hitched. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was Snoop Dogg. Marcus froze, blinking rapidly, half convinced his exhausted mind was playing tricks on him. But no, the figure in the hallway was real. And in his hand, he held a large case. Marcus quickly unlocked the door and pulled it open, his voice barely above a whisper. "You came back?" Snoop smiled warmly. "Told you I would." His gaze drifted past Marcus into the small apartment, taking in the modest living space. His expression softened when he spotted Emma peeking out from behind the couch, her wide eyes filled with both curiosity and hesitation. "Can I come in?" Marcus nodded quickly, stepping aside. The moment Snoop entered, the room felt different, like his presence alone had pushed away some of the heaviness that had been hanging in the air. Emma hesitated for a moment, then slowly stood, clutching her notebook to her chest. Snoop crouched down to her level, his voice kind and steady. "Hey there. You must be Emma." She nodded shyly. "Thank you for helping my brother." Snoop's smile widened. "Of course. That's what we do, right? We look out for each other." Marcus, still unable to take his eyes off the large case in Snoop's hands, finally let curiosity get the best of him. "What's that?" Snoop straightened up, setting the case down on the table. "Something for you." He flicked open the latches with a soft click, and as he lifted the lid, Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Inside was a brand new guitar. Its polished wood gleamed in the morning light. The strings were perfectly tuned, the craftsmanship flawless. It was nothing like the battered instrument Marcus had once played on the streets. This was something else entirely. This was a symbol of new beginnings. Marcus took a hesitant step forward, his hand hovering over the guitar as if afraid to touch it. "For me?" Snoop nodded. "For you. You've got talent, kid. And I don't want to see you give up on it just because some jerk broke your old one." Tears pricked at the corners of Marcus's eyes as he carefully lifted the guitar from its case. The weight of it felt right in his hands, familiar, yet new. He strummed a few chords, the rich, warm sound filling the apartment. It wasn't just music. It was hope. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know how to thank you enough." Snoop shook his head. "You don't have to. Just keep playing. That's thanks enough for me." A soft cough from the couch made Marcus turn. "Marcus, who's here?" His mother's voice was weak, barely above a whisper. He quickly set the guitar down and rushed to her side. "It's okay, Mom. This is Snoop." He helped us last night." Her eyes fluttered open, blinking in confusion as she took in the sight of the world-famous rapper standing in their living room. "Snoop Dogg?" Snoop let out a quiet chuckle. "That's me." She struggled to sit up, coughing as she did. Marcus quickly helped, propping pillows behind her back. I don't understand," she murmured, her voice laced with exhaustion. "Why are you here?" Snoop's tone softened. "Because your son's got something special. And because no kid should have to go through what he went through last night. I'm just here to help." Tears welled in her eyes, and she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, stifling a quiet sob. "You don't know how much this means to us. We've been struggling for so long." Snoop nodded. "I know. But you're not alone anymore." Emma climbed onto the couch, wrapping her small arms around her mother as if to anchor her in that moment. Marcus, still gripping the guitar, looked at Snoop with something between gratitude and disbelief. "You really mean it? You're going to help us?" Snoop met his gaze without hesitation. "I've already got people working on it. We're gonna make sure your mom gets the treatment she needs. And we're gonna get you both into a better place." Marcus's heart swelled, a feeling washing over him that he hadn't allowed himself to experience in a long time: hope. He swallowed hard. "But why?" Snoop's expression softened. "Because someone did it for me once. And now? It's my turn to pay it forward." And just like that, the weight on Marcus's chest felt a little lighter. For the first time in forever, things weren't just surviving. Things were changing. And this was just the beginning. Snoop wasted no time. With a few calls, he arranged medical care for Marcus's mother, secured a better apartment, and sent volunteers from his foundation with food, clothes, and supplies. Marcus watched in awe as his world transformed before his eyes. Later, Snoop pulled him aside. "I've got a favor to ask." Marcus tilted his head. "What is it?" "There's a community center downtown. They've got music programs, lessons, everything you need to take your skills to the next level. I want you to go there." Marcus hesitated. "I don't know." Snoop rested a hand on his shoulder. "You've got talent, kid. Don't waste it. This is your chance." Marcus glanced at his new guitar, remembering all the nights he played on the streets, hoping for change. And now, change was standing right in front of him. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll do it." Snoop grinned. "That's what I like to hear." As the day went on, the kindness they received felt almost unreal. But when Marcus saw his mother smile for the first time in weeks and heard Emma's laughter fill the apartment, he knew this was real. This was a new beginning. That evening, as Snoop prepared to leave, Marcus walked him to the door. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady this time. Snoop nodded. "You're a good kid, Marcus. Don't let anyone tell you different. And remember, keep playing. Music's your way out. Use it." Marcus clutched the guitar strap tightly. "I will." As he watched Snoop and his team disappear down the hallway, the weight of his past still lingered. But for the first time, the future felt brighter. Then, the story exploded. The next morning, footage of the incident hit the news. A passerby had captured everything. The video of the fake officers smashing Marcus's guitar and Snoop stepping in went viral. By midday, social media was flooded with support. Marcus scrolled through his phone in disbelief. Emma giggled, pointing at a headline, "A hero in the streets." Their mother, already looking stronger thanks to the help they received, watched them with a soft smile. "People are good," she murmured. "Sometimes, it takes something like this to remind us." A knock at the door made them all jump. Marcus hesitated, then opened it. Relief washed over him. Snoop Dogg stood there, smiling. "Hey, superstar. Can I come in?" Marcus stepped aside, grinning shyly. "Yeah, of course." Emma ran up, hugging Snoop's leg. He chuckled, ruffling her hair. You keeping your brother out of trouble? She giggled and nodded. Their mother, sitting up a little straighter, looked at Snoop with gratitude. I don't know what we would have done without you. Snoop waved it off. You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone should have done. Then, turning back to Marcus, his tone became serious. But we got more to talk about, kid. What do you mean? Snoop leaned back, studying him. Your story's everywhere now. People are talking. But it's not just about what happened to you, it's about something bigger. Marcus frowned. Bigger? Snoop nodded. There are a lot of kids out there like you. Kids trying to survive. People need to hear your voice. You've got a platform now. Use it. Marcus looked down, fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. But I'm just a kid. What can I do? Snoop placed a hand on his shoulder. You've already done more than you realize. You stood up. You survived. And now, people are listening. That's power, kid. And I want to help you use it. Marcus thought about Emma, about all the nights he played just to keep them fed. He wasn't sure about being a voice for change, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't let fear hold him back. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. Snoop's eyes lit up. First, keep playing your music. We'll get you some gigs, show people what you can do. But more importantly, keep telling your story. People need to hear it. Marcus nodded. Okay. I'll do it. Just then, another knock. Snoop's security opened the door to reveal two uniformed police officers. Marcus's heart pounded, but Snoop remained calm. The lead officer spoke respectfully. Mr. Broadus, we just wanted to update you on the investigation. Snoop nodded. Go ahead. The officer cleared his throat. The man who attacked Marcus wasn't a cop. He's a former security guard with a history of violence. He's been arrested and is facing multiple charges. Marcus let out a shaky breath. The officer turned to him. You're a brave kid. A lot braver than most people I know. As the officers left, the apartment felt lighter. Marcus sat back down, gripping his guitar. It's really over? He asked softly. Snoop nodded. The worst of it, yeah. But your story? That's just beginning. The journey begins. Over the next few weeks, Marcus threw himself into music. With Snoop's help, he got into a music program, performed at local events, and even started writing his own songs. His name spread, not just for what happened that night, but for the raw talent in his music. Then, one evening, his phone buzzed. A message from Snoop. You ready for your next big step? Marcus grinned. What is it? We're taking your story to the world. A few days later, Marcus found himself backstage at a massive charity concert. The venue was packed. As his name was announced, his heart pounded. He stepped into the spotlight, gripping his guitar. The crowd fell silent as he strummed the first chord. He sang about struggle, about hope, about the night someone finally saw him. When the final note rang out, the theater erupted in applause. Snoop walked on stage, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. This right here, he told the crowd, is proof that no matter where you come from, you've got the power to change your story. All it takes is someone to believe in you. As Marcus looked out at the cheering crowd, he realized something. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every kid who had ever felt invisible. And he was going to make sure they were seen.